the racial ambush and the fatal miscalculation. The congressional chamber was a crucible of political tension. But on this day, it felt more like a public execution. Nancy Pelosi, at 84, was not just presiding, she was orchestrating. Her gavel struck the podium like a final, preemptive sentence, and her voice, dripping with icy contempt, recognized the gentleman from Florida. Though I use that term loosely. The target, Representative Byron Donalds, a 43-year-old freshman, black Republican who had dared to challenge the deep-seated political and racial assumptions of the Democratic establishment. Pelosi, however, made a fatal miscalculation rooted in decades of unchallenged power. She mistook Donald's composure for weakness, and his political independence for betrayal. She launched the most searingly personal attack possible, weaponizing his very identity. The venom of the establishment. The gentleman from Florida represents everything wrong with his party. Pelosi's voice cracked, delivering a rhetorical blow aimed not just at his politics, but at his soul. The accusation was brutal. A black man who sold his soul to a party that would have kept him enslaved. A token and Uncle Tom in an expensive suit. The gasps rippled through the chamber. This wasn't merely political sparring. This was a fundamental violation of the unwritten rules of the American political discourse. Leveraging history's darkest elements for partisan gain, Pelosi compounded the injury by attacking the most sacred domain, his family. She accused him of raising children who will ask why he betrayed his race for their table. The entire progressive machinery, from pro-Pelosi protesters chanting, "Shame, shame," to congressional Black Caucus members shouting, "Not a real black leader," activated instantly. Media clips played on screens, MSNBC calling Donalds an Uncle Tom, CNN questioning his authenticity. The pile-on was perfectly orchestrated and utterly devastating. Controlled rage, the weapon of truth. Byron Donalds sat, absorbing the storm of hatred, surrounded by hundreds of people screaming that he was not black enough. The analysis here must recognize the internal battle. Donalds felt the familiar burn of controlled rage. The same burn he felt when society underestimated or judged him based on color. But his mother's wisdom echoed, Byron. Angry black men scare them. Smart black men terrify them. Be smart, baby. Pelosi's venomous attack on his family was the final, unforgivable mistake. She thought he was unprepared. As Pelosi concluded, declaring that history would judge him harshly, Donald's voice cut through the noise. Calm, measured, and possessing a chilling finality. Madam Speaker, he asked, standing slowly, are you finished? The unexpected composure threw Pelosi off balance. Her flush and slight hesitation, the gentleman may proceed, were the first crack in her armor. Donalds didn't waste a second on defense. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate you revealing your character to the American people. Now they can see what I'm about to expose isn't partisan. It's personal for you. You need to destroy me before I destroy your empire. The political temperature had instantly shifted. Donalds was no longer the defendant, he was the prosecutor, turning Pelosi's personal attack into the justification for his own, far more damaging, exposure. The empire's foundation, $54 million in suspicious trades. Donald's counterattack was brutal in its simplicity. He opened a thick manila folder and directed the C-SPAN cameras to the display screen. Let's discuss who really sold out. Let's discuss your family business. Let's start with simple math. The screen flashed the first staggering statistic. Paul Pelosi stock profits. 2024 $54 million returned 65%. S&P 524%. The gallery erupted in gasps. Democrats stared in shock. The analysis was self-evident. A $54 million return vastly outperforming the market. Better than any hedge fund. Better than Warren Buffett. Donalds delivered the inescapable question. Financial genius, or did he have help? Pelosi's shouted denial. My husband makes his own decisions. I have no involvement, was instantly demolished. Donalds presented the timeline of the Nvidia trade. Paul Pelosi buying the stock just weeks before the House, led by Nancy Pelosi, passed the $52 billion CHIPS Act. The profit, $1.6 million in 73 days. Did you discuss the CHIPS Act with your husband before he traded? Did you tell him how the vote would go? Did you tell him when? The repeated questions, met with silence, were a guilty plea in absentia. Donalds closed the opening sequence by revealing his true payload. Nvidia was just one trade. Shall we discuss Visa, Microsoft, Broadcom, Tesla? Because I have them all. Every suspicious trade, every convenient timing, every impossible coincidence. The political battlefield was now an audit, and Donalds had secured the records. The machine activates sexism, misogyny, and the counterarrative. The immediate aftermath of the $54 million exposure sent the Democratic establishment reeling, forcing Nancy Pelosi to revert to her most experienced defense mechanism, turning the attack into a narrative of victimization. This was the moment the full political machine activated, attempting to deploy the politics of identity as a shield against the politics of fact. Pelosi banged her gavel like gunfire. Order. This chamber will come to order. What we're witnessing is a disgraceful partisan attack. A witch hunt. The shield of identity. The central pillar of her defense was a calculated pivot to gender. When they can't defend their policies, they attack successful women. This is sexism. This is ageism. A coordinated assault on a woman who's fought for working families. The response was instantaneous and coordinated. Democrats began applauding. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus stood in solidarity with the Speaker. Squad members were already tweeting, "I stand with Nancy," framing the financial probe as a sexist attack. The media infrastructure followed the script perfectly. CNN's Kyron screamed, "Republicans attack Pelosi with unverified claims," and MSNBC panels suggested the entire episode smells like misogyny. The goal was to transform the documented evidence of insider trading into a politically unspeakable crime, an attack on a woman in power. For Pelosi, protecting the illusion of the trailblazer was paramount to shielding the reality of the empire. The pattern of perfection. Visa and DOJ. Byron Donalds watched the choreographed defense with professional disdain. He waited until the applause died down, allowing the institutional noise to prove his earlier point. They would attack the messenger rather than defend the substance. When he stood again, his voice was calm, dismantling the emotional appeal with clinical precision. "Madam Speaker, I appreciate your passion. Now, let's talk about Visa." He presented the next timeline. Paul Pelosi sold $526 in Visa stock in July 2024. Months before the DOJ sued Visa for monopoly in September 2024, causing the stock to crash 5%. The timing was, once again, perfect. Pelosi attempted to argue her husband was a financial savant who reads indicators. But Donalds delivered the undeniable contradiction. The lawsuit was sealed. The investigation confidential. Even Wall Street analysts didn't see it coming. He held up a headline, "Visa lawsuit surprises analysts." Donalds' analysis became an explicit charge of corruption. You sit on committees with DOJ oversight. You receive classified briefings. Did you tell him about the investigation? The pattern was undeniable, and Donalds forced the chamber to see the totality of the documented trades. Microsoft stock bought days before a major Army contract. Apple bought before App Store legislation. Amazon bought before a regulation vote. The running tally of $54 million was not investing. Donalds declared, "This is front-running. This is using congressional knowledge for personal profit." The crack in the dam. Democratic defection. The sustained assault of facts began to break the political dam. A young progressive Democrat from Texas stood, voicing the internal party anxiety. "Madam Speaker, my constituents are asking me about these trades. How do I answer them?" The question wasn't hostile, it was a plea for a defense that didn't exist. The crack became a fissure as other Democrats stood, expressing concern and suggesting transparency. Pelosi, recognizing the institutional betrayal, played her final, most desperate card, aiming to silence the dissent with a blast of racial venom. "They send a black Republican to attack me. So when we defend ourselves, they cry racism." She pointed her finger, shaking, at Donalds. "This man serves white supremacist interests, while wearing a black face." The words hung in the air like a political poison, an attempt to use the most toxic accusation in American politics to deflect from her financial exposure. The devastating flip. WHO really sold out WHO? Nancy Pelosi's use of the blackface accusation, an unprecedented moment of racial attack on the House floor, was meant to be the final silencing blow. Instead, it provided Byron Donalds with the perfect opportunity to execute his most devastating strategic move, flipping the race card against the establishment that deployed it. Donalds stood slowly, his voice dropping to a controlled, powerful register. "Madam Speaker, you just proved everything I've said about your party." He didn't defend his race, he indicted the political machine that tried to own it. "You think you own black votes. You think black people can't think independently. Any black person who disagrees with you must be a sellout." The San Francisco Mirror, poverty and opulence. Donalds then walked to the center chamber, demanding attention be shifted from his character to Pelosi's record of failure in the very community she claimed to champion. He pulled up San Francisco statistics, Pelosi's district, which she had represented for 35 years. The contrast was devastating. Black poverty, up 33% under her leadership. Black income, down a significant percentage. Black homelessness, exploding, seeing a 100% increase. He looked directly at her, juxtaposing the data with her personal wealth. "This is your district under your leadership for 35 years. Your net worth $240 million. Your district's black community suffering." The question, repeated with quiet fury, was the rhetorical kill shot of the day. Who sold out who? The contrast of character. Donalds didn't just expose her corruption, he created a devastating contrast of character. He pointed out that while Pelosi made millions trading stocks and bought mansions, her constituents became homeless. Then, he delivered the personal truth that was far more powerful than any statistic. "I don't work for white supremacists. I work for my constituents. All of them. And I don't get rich doing it. My net worth decreased since entering Congress because I'm actually serving." This admission, a politician openly stating their net worth had declined while serving, was an explosive ethical contrast to Pelosi's $238 million unexplained increase in wealth. The contrast was brutal and undeniable. One used public office for personal enrichment. The other suffered personal financial loss to serve. Donald's final, resolute warning was clear: "So, don't you ever question my integrity again. Don't you ever question my blackness. Don't you ever attack my family. Because your husband's corruption is just the beginning." He had successfully disarmed her most dangerous weapon and prepared the chamber for the next, even more personal, financial target. The son's frauds, the family empire exposed. Having established a pattern of alleged insider trading by Paul Pelosi Sr., Byron Donalds pivoted to the most politically sensitive, and most carefully concealed, part of the Pelosi financial empire, their son, Paul Pelosi Jr. This was the moment the public office was exposed as a familial ATM. A system designed to enrich the dynasty. Donalds opened a new folder, revealing the younger Pelosi's career as a masterclass in crony capitalism. The 2,000-mile, two-job mystery. The timeline was damning. 4 weeks after Nancy Pelosi became the first female speaker in January 2007. Her son, Paul Jr., was hired at Info USA for an annual salary of $180. Donalds highlighted the obvious corruption: no relevant experience, no relevant education. He then added the critical piece of evidence: Info USA's CEO, Vinod Gupta, was a major Clinton Foundation donor. The situation became surreal when Donalds exposed the logistical absurdity. Paul Jr.'s residence was in California, 2.000 miles from the Omaha, Nebraska headquarters, and staff records showed he was rarely there. Worse, he kept his full-time job at Countrywide Financial in California. Donalds delivered the obvious conclusion: 2 full-time jobs, 2.000 meters apart. How? Unless one isn't a job. Unless it's payment for access to you. The $180 was not a salary for work. It was a fee for influence, a direct payment for access to the Speaker's office. The Countrywide scandal. VIP loans and subprime betrayal. The hypocrisy deepened when Donalds connected the son's job at Countrywide Financial to the mother's personal gain. Countrywide, the epicenter of the subprime mortgage crisis, was issuing predatory loans while under federal investigation. Yet, Nancy Pelosi herself received VIP loans, part of the Friends of Angelo program reserved for influential people, at below market rates. A woman from the gallery, Jennifer Martinez, stood up, her voice trembling with emotion, giving the abstract fraud a human face. She described losing her home after Countrywide lied to her about a prime loan. "You got VIP loans while we lost everything. Your son worked there. You knew what they were doing." Donalds allowed the cries of pain and betrayal to wash over the chamber, demonstrating the moral bankruptcy of the Pelosi operation. Natural Blue and the Ukraine hypocrisy. The exposure continued with Paul Jr.'s 2013 co-founding of Natural Blue Resources, a supposed green energy company that the SEC later charged with securities fraud in 2014. The company was secretly controlled by convicted criminals, engaging in a classic pump and dump stock manipulation scheme. Donalds displayed video footage of Nancy Pelosi promoting her son's company at an event, leveraging her name and reputation to lend credibility to a fraud that wiped out the retirement savings and college funds of investors, including an elderly black man, Robert Johnson, who testified that he lost his entire $45 retirement. Donalds then hit the final, crushing blow of hypocrisy: Ukraine. He showed Paul Jr. traveling to Ukraine and discussing business while Nancy Pelosi controlled U.S. policy toward the nation. In 2019, you impeached Trump over a Ukraine phone call. You said it was about corruption, about using office for personal gain. He paused, his voice thick with accusation. But your son did business in Ukraine while you controlled Ukraine policy. The hypocrisy hung thick. The message was undeniable. They prosecuted an opponent for the appearance of corruption in Ukraine while their own family allegedly profited from actual business dealings there. The slow, quiet exodus of senior Democrats confirmed the gravity of the systemic family corruption exposed. The January 6 scapegoat: security failures and buried truth. With the financial integrity of the Pelosi family dynasty in ruins, Byron Donalds turned his attention to Nancy Pelosi's alleged political failures and her subsequent manipulation of historical truth. This segment focused on the January 6 Capitol breach, exposing her immediate reaction versus her later, carefully constructed public narrative. Donalds announced his intention to reveal video footage the January 6 committee allegedly buried, a tactical move designed to indict the entire political process that had protected her. Responsibility admitted, then denied. The screen flickered, showing raw, behind-the-scenes HBO documentary footage from January 6, 2021. Pelosi, visibly stressed during the evacuation, was captured speaking to her chief of staff, Terry. Her words were an immediate admission of guilt. "We have responsibility. Terry, we did not have accountability for what was going on. This is ridiculous. Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with? I take responsibility for not having them prepared." Donalds pressed stop, letting the admission hang in the silent chamber. "I take responsibility." "Your words, Madam Speaker." January 6, 2021. He then juxtaposed this private admission with her subsequent, carefully staged public statement months later, where she declared, "The sole responsibility lies with Donald Trump." Donalds confronted her with the inescapable contradiction. "So which is it? Do you take responsibility as you said on January 6, or is it solely Trump's fault?" Optics over safety. The National Guard denial. Donalds revealed the damning timeline. The Capitol Police Chief had requested the National Guard 3 times between January 3 and 5, 2021. The response? Denied each time. The reason for the denial was the final, devastating indictment of Pelosi's leadership priorities. Optics. The chief's son testified that he was told, "Pelosi will never go for it." Donalds drove the point home. "You rejected National Guard 3 times. Not because it wasn't needed, because you worried about how it would look." He further charged that after her decision led to the breach, she immediately blamed Trump, created a committee, buried this footage. The manipulation was a cover-up, and the scapegoat was the one man who had tried to secure the building, Chief Sund. Donalds displayed a headline: "Pelosi calls for Capitol Police Chief to resign." "You forced him out, made him the scapegoat." Destroyed his career to cover your tracks. The COVID hypocrisy. Rules for thee. The final, illustrative moment of hypocrisy was the COVID salon scandal. A perfect metaphor for the Democratic elite's distance from the people they governed. Donald's played security footage from September 2020, Nancy Pelosi. Mask around her neck, inside a San Francisco salon that, by the very orders she supported, was supposed to be closed. He displayed her own tweets. Follow the science. Keep businesses closed. Wear masks. Save lives. The irony was agonizing. The salon owner, Erica Kios, stood in the gallery, her voice thick with tears, explaining how Pelosi had accused her of setting her up and ruined her business with death threats. Rules for thee, not for me, Donald's declared. Small businesses destroyed, but you got your $85 blowout. Donald's then presented the comprehensive timeline: 35 years of corruption, insider trading, family frauds, campaign violations, January 6 failures, and COVID hypocrisy, all while her personal wealth exploded and her district suffered. The final, painful reality check was delivered by senior Democrats who, one by one, rose to demand a full, transparent investigation, the true sign that the political elite had abandoned their former leader. The kill shot. The $238 million deficit and the legacy burn. The systematic dismantling of Nancy Pelosi's family, policy, and moral authority culminated in Byron Donald's final, crushing segment: the direct, statistical contrast between her unexplained wealth and the destruction of her district. This was the kill shot, aimed not just at her career, but at the entirety of her carefully curated legacy. Donald's directed attention to a simple graph, revealing the central, undeniable mathematical contradiction of her career. Nancy Pelosi net worth 1987, $2 million. Nancy Pelosi net worth 2025, $240 million. Congressional salary 35 years, $7 million total. The unexplained wealth, $238 million. Simple math, Donald stated, his voice devoid of emotion, allowing the numbers to speak the indictment. You're short by $230 million. Where did it come from? The answer was supplied by a series of images: the $25 million Pacific Heights mansion, the $25 million Napa Valley vineyard, and multiple additional properties. Your property taxes alone exceed most Americans' annual income. The screen split, creating a devastating visual metaphor for her legacy. On the left, Pelosi's pristine mansion with security gates; on the right, her own district's Tenderloin district, homeless tents, drug needles, boarded businesses. Donald's then detailed the human cost of her 35-year reign. San Francisco homelessness, up plus 1,200%. Drug deaths, up plus 211%. Population, 72.000 fleeing her district. The testimonies of betrayal. The gallery became the final jury. A young black nurse, Kesha Williams, stood, trembling, pointing at Pelosi's mansion on the screen. I can't afford to live in my own city. My grandmother's house. We had to sell it. She asked the devastating question: where were you? Where was your fight for families like mine while you got rich? An elderly Asian man followed, recounting closing his corner store after 40 years due to constant robberies that police wouldn't stop. You live in Pacific Heights with private security. My store is boarded up and you did nothing. The testimonies transformed the financial data into a moral reckoning. While her constituents became poorer and homeless, Pelosi grew $240 million rich. Donald's concluded by bringing the entire narrative full circle to the very laws passed in response to her alleged conduct. He cited Senator Hawley naming the proposed anti-corruption bill the Pelosi Act, designed to prevent elected leaders from owning securities in regulated industries. He named it after you because you are the face of congressional corruption. The final demand: resignation. Donald's walked toward the diminished speaker, his voice soft but cutting. He summarized her 35-year legacy with a clear list of documented betrayals, insider trading, Sons frauds, January 6 failures, COVID hypocrisy, and district destruction. This isn't public service. This is organized corruption. A family empire built on exploiting office. He delivered the final, non-negotiable demand. I call for immediate ethics committee investigation, DOJ review of stock trading, and I call for Nancy Pelosi to resign immediately. The chamber exploded. Republicans shouted for votes. Democrats fled. Donalds looked at the frozen speaker one last time. History won't remember you as a trailblazer. It will remember you as the most corrupt speaker in modern history. Byron Donalds walked out, composed and victorious. Behind him, Nancy Pelosi sat alone, unable to speak, the fire of her legacy burning uncontrollably. The crushing symbolism. The wheelchair and the cold exit. The immediate aftermath of Byron Donalds' exposé was not chaos, but a moment of profound institutional trauma. The sheer volume of evidence, the financial deficit, the family frauds, the January 6 footage, had exhausted the political system's ability to defend itself. The narrative was lost. The only thing left was the survival of the political self. The final, defining image of Nancy Pelosi's reign was one of physical and political collapse. The breakdown of the trailblazer. As Donalds left, chaos erupted around her desk. Pelosi, at 84, physically wilted under the stress. Her legs buckled as she tried to stand. Her whispered plea, "I need help me up," was the final, tragic admission of lost power. The ultimate humiliation came when she whispered, "Get me a wheelchair." The symbolism was crushing. The woman who had wielded absolute power, commanding the full force of the legislative branch, was being wheeled out of her own chamber like an invalid. Her once formidable authority reduced to a physical frailty. Photographers captured every moment. The hallways were a war zone of shouting reporters. But the isolation was the most painful. In the elevator, alone with a junior staffer, Pelosi finally asked the fatal question, "How did this happen?" The staffer's honest, brutal reply was the final judgment of history. "Ma'am, people have been talking about this for years. We just couldn't say it out loud. Everyone knew something was wrong." The divorce of convenience. Family retreat. The unraveling continued at the highest personal level. Her office was being dismantled. Her nameplate coming down. The physical space of her power being erased. But the final, most painful blow came from her own family. She called her closest allies, all voicemail. She called her children, all voicemail. They were protecting their own re-election campaigns and reputations. Finally, her husband, Paul Pelosi Sr., called back. His voice, cold and purely transactional. His message was one of legal strategy, not companionship. "Nancy, the lawyers say separate finances immediately. Separate tax returns. Maybe separate residences. Until this settles, I have to protect myself." 58 years of marriage. Ending with a clinical legal statement. The family empire, founded on mutual profit, was liquidating itself in a panic of self-preservation. Pelosi sat in the darkness, having lost power, legacy, allies, and family in a single, brutal day. The anticlimactic exit. 3 weeks later, the press conference was a simple, anticlimactic formality. Nancy Pelosi, looking far older, approached a simple podium before a handful of reporters. "After 35 years of service, I am resigning from Congress effective immediately," she stated, her voice flat, defeated. She walked away without taking questions. The architect of the modern Democratic Party, the most powerful woman in American history, exited the stage not with a roar, but with a whisper of defeat. The ensuing cascade of investigations, DOJ review of stock trading, FBI inquiry into Paul Jr.'s dealings, IRS audits, properties going up for sale, confirmed the total collapse of the family empire. The empire was liquidating. History would indeed remember the numbers: $240 million net worth versus $7 million salary. A mathematical proof of corruption that finally undid a 35-year reign.